everybody, Miss Bissell here today. We're going to talk about visual poetry, which is one of my favorites. Visual poetry is not just about the words, but it's also about what you see. It definitely has a visual component, which seems kind of obvious. It combines what you see and feel inside with the words on the page. Basically, if poetry and visual arts had a baby, it would be visual poetry. There's many different styles, which we're going to go through some examples today so you can see some of those styles. The purpose of visual poetry is that it is written for your eyes as well as your ears. So poetry is usually something you read out loud, so you hear the rhyme and the rhythm, but visual poetry is something that you can hear as well as see. It uses text, images, symbols, typography, and different things to convey an intended effect, to reinforce its meaning, and to enhance the effect on the reader. It's not just for your listening pleasure, it's also for your visual pleasure. Now, I'm going to go through this presentation and I have a ton of examples just to kind of spark your interest and give you some ideas. Basically, how do you write visual poetry? Well, it's literally limited only by your imagination. If you have a great idea, you can do it when it comes to visual poetry. Some things to consider are shape. So, for example, this poem, which is in the shape of a dog, or this one, where the shape isn't as important as the way that the letters flow on the page and overlap to create this perpetual motion poem. It also can do with size, so the size of your lettering or the size of your font or the weight of it, the width of your font, so how wide apart it is, or even using your font to create its own words. Like, you know that this poem is about you are, but then the words of the poem are in that phrase. It also has to do with posture, so whether your letters are upright, like man's best friend, or diagonal, like the word adopt here, or perhaps blurry and swirling, like this one, or even arched, like this rainbow poem. Visual poetry can also play with color and lots of different things. And there's many different things to think about when we're taking a look and when we're writing visual poetry. The most important things to ask yourself are what's been left out, what's been included, what's been repeated or emphasized, how do you feel and how does it connect to what you're reading, and how do the visuals add to what you're reading. So I have three really great examples here that I want to take a look at to answer some of these questions. So, for example, this poem called Lazy Jane, I don't even have to read the words of this poem for you to understand that this poem is about somebody who's lazy, and the words are almost following down the page and flowing into her mouth because she's so lazy. Or what about this crumbling poem where the words are literally crumbling on the page? The impression I get of this poem is that I am crumbling. Notice how the letter I in the word crumbling is a different color, it stands out. But then the words are falling into each other, and you can still see the words like help me and please and silence and I can't and I need help or whatever. But the words are crumbling and it creates an incredible visual impact on the reader. Lewis Carroll created this poem called The Mouse's Tale, and it's almost as if the words are swirling down the page in the line of a mouse and their tail. So think about what's been left out, what's been included, how are the words arranged, how are the words creating a visual impact. Even before I read any of these poems, I kind of can already see what they are about. So there's seven different main styles of visual poetry that we're going to take a look at. And when you have your visual poetry assignment, you are going to create two visual poems, and you can choose from any of these styles or create your own visual poem. So let's take a look at what they are. So blackout poetry takes a piece of text and creates a poem by selecting certain words on that page and marking through the rest. So it could be a newspaper, a book page, an brochure, a dictionary page, a magazine page. The purpose is to create something meaningful out of something that would be considered ordinary, like a brochure from a doctor's office, or to change the perspective or to change the mood and theme. So perhaps the newspaper article is about war, but you can pick out certain words and black out the other ones to create a hopeful message. Anyone can scribble out words. The clever part is knowing which words to leave out or which words to leave. So notice this one has used a newspaper article blacking out certain parts and leaving the poem in the cleared out parts. This author has used art and has blacked out but also created an image. This one has left most of the poem of the conversations with friends blank, so you can still see that it's a newspaper article, but it's connected the different words together with this trailing line. I love how this Sir Shadow poem has utilized both the pictures and the words on this page to create a blackout poem. This one has drawn a violin to create a musical aesthetic on their page, and you definitely understand what this poem is about even before you start to read the words. I love how these two authors have also used color and design to create more of an impact on their blackout poems. See, the one on the left is about dandelions, and the ones on the right is about galaxies and stars, even before you actually read the actual blackout poem. The next style of visual poetry we're going to take a look at is an acrostic. Now, you probably know what an acrostic is, maybe from elementary school, but basically, certain letters, usually the ones on the left-hand side, form a message when read together. Most acrostics have rhymes, but the rhyme scheme can vary. So, for example, check out this poem by Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote a poem about a woman named Elizabeth. And if you notice on the left-hand side of his page, the letters spell out her name: Elizabeth. And at the end of his lines, he has a rhyme scheme. This next poem that I want to show you also did something similar with people's names. Lewis Carroll wrote a holiday poem as a gift for some little sisters named Lorena, Alice, and Edith. And his poem says, "Little maidens, when you look on this little storybook, reading with attentive eye." So if they really were reading with attentive eye, they would notice that their names are spelt out along the left-hand side of this poem. This poem, called Overpopulation in Art, actually has the acrostic going down the middle, and the lines are all jumbled up and created so that overpopulation is down the middle and it's bolded. Notice this "I love you" poem in the top left-hand corner actually uses "I love you" to create the title or the message of the poem, but then when you read the poem, it says, "I do see you love not me, God bless you." So it's about how somebody loves someone, but they don't love them back. So whether you decide to put your acrostic down the left-hand side of the page, maybe down the right hand, down the middle, or use a phrase or a name or a word like time, you can create a really beautiful visual poem using acrostic. Shape poem is basically what it sounds like. It's a poem that takes on the form of a shape. You can draw a line around your shape poem, but it's not necessary. Typically, the shape is a common or easily recognized object, like this one, which is a poem about a house in the shape of a house. This one is a butterfly. It has a lot more words, but it still creates a shape. This one, the author has used the words to do the outline of the shape of a fox. Many famous poets would create images of people using shape poetry. And you can use different font widths and sizes and styles of font and typography, which is basically the style of the type, to create flowing hair, different parts of a person. Notice how this one uses almost the positive and the negative of the shape. Can you tell what it is? If you squint your eyes and lean back, you might be able to see that it's a panda. This author has created a poem about a panda using both the negative and the positive to create the effect of their shape. Concrete poetry is similar to shape poetry. They go hand in hand. However, concrete poetry doesn't necessarily take on a particular shape, but rather the wording of the poem enhances the effect. And it uses different type or typography to create its effect. Notice this poem, Silencio, by Eugene Gomringer. He repeats the word silencio, which means silence, multiple times to create his poem, but in the middle of his poem, the word disappears, almost that the word itself is being silent. Time passes by, we see this incredible poem, which has the words almost falling off, drifting away as time passes by, and you're saying goodbye to the time. But the words don't have to be all from left to right and in the normal way we would read a poem. Check out this poem about growing taller, and the words are almost growing taller on the page. Once I was only very small, but now I'm taller than tall, taller, 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 very tall. And the words are all over the page, creating a visual effect. This poem is about a woodpecker and how it pecking away is driving this person crazy. Notice how the word in killing are spread out. The letters are spread out almost as if they are being pecked away, like the K peck, I peck, peck, L, and so on. This poem about panic attacks, notice how the words are super close together, as if the person having a panic attack is closing in on themselves, and the words are falling off the page as they're struggling to breathe. E.E. Cummings created this poem about loneliness, and you will see that the word a leaf falls is within the parentheses or the brackets, and the word loneliness is on the outside. A leaf falling is a metaphor for loneliness, E.E. Cummings is creating. Here's another poem about loneliness. What does the visual effect of this poem show you? That the S is falling off, that it's alone, it's not connected to the other letters. Found and collage poem is another type of visual poem, and basically it tweaks our known idea of what poetry should look like and what it can be. Words and phrases or letters are strung together from various sources to make a poem. So it's also sometimes considered kind of like a ransom letter kind of poem, where you take words from different places, magazines, newspapers, articles, brochures, books, and put them together to create a poem. This author has used various phrases like spring harmony, spring growing, nature's goodness abounds. This author has used different words from different locations, while this one has used different letters from different locations. Not all the words they were able to find, but they strung together letters to create their poem. Or here's another style of found poetry where authors find poems in the titles of their books, and it's called book spine poetry, and they basically line up different books titles to make a poem. Notice this one. This big sky, a crack in the clouds, splash, sounds of rain, joyful noise, water music, desert song. It sounds like a poem, but it's created with different titles. I love this other one, which has used a combination of adult and children's books. The Great Escape from City Zoo, a strange expedition. Oh, the places you'll go. The hidden forest, where the wild things are, down in the garden, and so on. So found and collage poetry is all about gathering things around you to create a poem. You can also do this through photography or film, and photography and film can be used to enhance your poetry. They often include words, but not always. Sometimes an image or a group of images can say something all on their own. Like this gentleman, which has put letters in his mouth to take pictures. Imagine creating a whole poem this way with words or phrases in people's mouths and taking pictures that way. Or alternatively, taking a picture and adding your words within the picture, almost falling onto the trees like this one. Or sometimes this is done in advertising or on street signs. Big mistake many make, relying on horn instead of brake. Or notice how this picture almost completely goes with the theme of the poem. Even before you read the poem, you have a feeling, an idea of what this poem is going to be about. And then when you read the poem, the way your eyes shine as you walk along, glimmering orbs of daylight with a heartwarming smirk to match. It almost fits with the visual that the author has decided to take their picture. And it's possible that they took the picture first and then wrote the poem, or wrote the poem and then went and took a picture. This author actually wrote the words of their poem on an item and took a picture of it. This one's really simple, but it says a lot. Maybe your ego is like a balloon. It gets blown up, but it can be deflated. It can pop. The next one I want to take a look at is equation poetry. Basically, equation poetry is poems that are written as mathematical equations, taking both the left and the right side of our brains, both the creative and analytical sides of our brain, and combining them together to create a poem. Whether you use addition or multiplication, division, subtraction, square root, quotient, or equal signs, they each have their own meaning and can be incorporated into a poem. Now, equation poetry doesn't always necessarily follow mathematical rules or make sense mathematically. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't always have to. Let me show you some examples. If the square root of tomorrow minus the square root of yesterday equals now, and maybe if silence divided by the square root of voice, etc. Notice how this poem almost looks like it's incorporated different mathematical elements to create a message of what they're trying to say, joy to infinity. This author has used multiple equal signs, has signed their name with the pi symbol, and definitely has a point that they're trying to get across through the mathematical symbols that they employ. This one doesn't necessarily use the mathematical symbol, but uses mathematical elements within their poem to make a point. I would hate to believe that 9-digit number assigned to me defined my destiny, or that my length and width played a huge part of who I can be. My center is what I want the world to see. Like in math, love is an equation. Add 2 hearts, then subtract it. Solve for x and you'll know why. Stay together and don't divide. Be happy and multiply. Almost as if the author wants people to realize that their width and their height and the number of who they are isn't what makes them up, but that they desire love and that they want to be multiplied and be happy. This poem uses mathematical terms such as profits, losses, degrees, percentage, geometry, algebra, integers, lines, parallels, angles, etc., to create an equation poem. Check out this algebraic poem, which literally looks like the algebra problems of my nightmares since I wasn't a huge math person. But if you are a math person, maybe you can see what it's all about. It's all about the month of May and how there's sun and green and living and possibility. And I love how it creates a poem through using math. So whether you decide to use blackout poetry, acrostic, shape, concrete, found, collage, photo, film, or equation, you can create beautiful visual poems, which are beautiful not just to your ears, but also to your eyes. So I challenge you to let your imagination run wild and to create 2 visual poems. Can't wait to see and hear them.